okay? But the point is we need to understand that this has been a deliberate effort for a long time. It's not a new problem. And essentially what we have today is that the federal government realizes there's certain things it's not allowed to do. So what it does is it bribes the state with funds and monies and stuff to get the states to do it, okay? So how can we stop all this mess? I mean, how can we get back to the way our system's supposed to work? And when I say supposed to work, I mean a federalist system whereby the states maintain their independent sovereign status, okay? Just like the European Union does today. Everybody's familiar with the European Union, okay? We're the American Union, they're the European Union. When you think of the European Union, do you think of it as a country? What is it? It's a corporation, right? Of independent sovereign nation states, right? Just like the American Union. But when you think of America, what do you think? A country. America is not a country, or the United States is not a country. The federal government is not a country, okay? It's a union, just very similar to the European Union of independent sovereign nation states, okay? Now, you got to understand there's a very distinct delegation of authority between state powers and federal powers. And this is part of the balance of powers under the Constitution. So, a lot of the problems that we're facing today are a direct result of both state and federal government operating outside their constitutional limits. And it's safe to say that because you can go talk to your legislators and congressmen and ask them questions about the Constitution, and they haven't got a clue what you're talking about. Most of them haven't even read it, okay? But yet they're supposed to protect it and preserve it, right? All right, so now we're kind of in a unique situation. We have all these people coming out of the closet, going to these meetings and so forth, looking for a way to resolve these issues. And what they're not thinking Constitution. What they're thinking is, daggone, I mean, I'm going to be foreclosed, filing foreclosure on my house because the banking industry is going to pot, or this federal stimulus package and all this debt they've put on my grandkids, or the war in Iraq, or whatever. They're looking at all that stuff. But what they're seeing is the symptoms. The source of being government, both state and federal, not adhering to the strict limitations of the constitutions. Okay, so if we can get government back in alignment with the Constitution, wouldn't it make sense that we could probably fix some of these other problems? Would it? Okay. Guess what? There's a way to do it. There's a way, the process for doing it is already well established within the law and within our mechanisms of government to do. Okay, now we're not going to change federal government by ourselves as the people, okay? There's three ways that we have to influence federal government, okay, through the Constitution. One is the First Amendment through the redress of grievances, okay, but that's never worked. The second is through petitioning of our congressmen, right? And how many of you have written your congressman and gotten, real enthusiastic reply saying that they're going to, get right on your ingenious idea, right? Okay? Doesn't happen. Congressmen aren't paying any attention to you. Same thing's pretty much happening with our state legislatures, but that's our last option, okay? So here's the point. If we want to control federal government, we have to do it through the states. Because who controls the federal government? The states do, right? Okay. But I might not be able to change federal government just by getting Ohio straightened out, but we want to get Ohio straightened out. Three primary things, okay? We're introducing an amendment to the Ohio Constitution that does three primary things that aren't in there now, okay? One, We're going to introduce language that specifically requires Ohio government to comply with the Ohio Constitution. Huh, isn't that a novel idea? Okay? Secondly, we're going to introduce language that makes them accountable and liable to punishment when they violate the Constitution. That seems like it should be there too, right? And it's not. And the third thing is we're going to introduce provisions that provide the people an effective and efficient manner to enforce the Ohio Constitution against Ohio government. Okay? Now, it wouldn't make sense to do all this stuff and not have a way to enforce what you're doing, right? Is that right? Okay. So we got to have an enforcement mechanism there. Right now, that doesn't exist. Okay? There's no efficient or effective way for the people to hold government accountable. Whose duty is it to hold government accountable? The people. It's always been the people's duty to hold government accountable. It's our government. It's just like when your kids misbehave, okay? Who's liable? The kids or you? Ultimately, you're liable, right? They're your kids. You have responsibility to make sure that they do what they're supposed to do. And we have the same responsibility with respect to our government. We created it. We're liable for it, okay? It's our duty to hold them accountable. Now, here's the other thing. Once we get our state government under control, adhering to the Constitution, being liable if they abuse it, and being able to enforce the Constitution, guess what? We can also put language in our Constitution that mandates that Ohio, or in this case, let's say, since we're in Pennsylvania today, let's say introduce language in the Pennsylvania Constitution that mandates that Pennsylvania government protect Pennsylvania citizens from unconstitutional federal mandates. Okay, so if the federal government wants to implement an unconstitutional health care bill that you don't want any part of, okay, Pennsylvania government would have to look at that bill, make a determination whether it's constitutionally compliant or not, and if not, would have a duty to not enforce that against somebody. Okay? Now, that would give you a first line of protection, but understand this, the federal government is going to keep on doing what they're doing. Okay? So eventually, what do we got to do? We got to not only reunite the citizens of the states to hold their state governments accountable, but we got to reunite the states into the union for a common purpose. Okay? Now, understand, if we had 40 states putting pressure on the back of the federal government neck, guess what? The federal government is going to pay attention, right? Now, keep in mind that just like the people have the sovereign power and responsibility and duty to alter, reform, or even abolish state government as they deem necessary, the states have that same right to alter, abolish federal government when the federal government is operating outside their authorities, okay? Now, so, what's the solution? How do we do that? How do we get this made into law? Well, we're going to use the initiative process,